patterns of globalization are shaped by three great drivers: the physical geography of different parts of the world, the technologies and know-how that we have, and the cultural and political institutions that bring us together or divide us by war. And in this class, we're going to discuss the physical geography, how the physical Earth and Earth systems shape society, and how changes in the physical Earth, in the climate, for example, change economies and society. Well, physical geography has many, many dimensions to it. We will focus on the dimensions of climate, the dimensions of topography and geology, that is the physical structures of the Earth and locations on the planet, the crucial role of rivers and riversheds in shaping where people live and in activities and trade in which they engage, the role of trade routes both over land and sea in connecting different parts of the world, and the different disease patterns that affect different places in the world by virtue of the species in those places, as well as the climate and other factors which affect the epidemiology of disease, that is, the nature of disease burdens and how disease spreads. Let's consider first the role of climate, one of the most fascinating basic determinants of economic structure and indeed in history of wealth and poverty around the world. Now, for this purpose, it's important to have an idea of what is climate and how climate varies across the world. A climate is like the average of weather. The weather changes day by day, some days rainy, some days sunny, some seasons warm, some seasons cold, and the climate is a kind of average in a given place of the weather. So the climate defines the average patterns of weather in different places in the world. And scientists have created categories of climate to help us understand the differences of average weather or of climate in different regions of the world. And a categorization that we'll use in this class that I very much like and have used in my own understanding and research is called the Köppen-Geiger system, or KG system of climate classification. And one can look at a map of the world color-coded according to different climate zones. It's very useful to do this and to look at your own place in the world and understand your own climate and compare the climate of your home with that of other parts of the world to understand how climate has shaped your nation's economy and how it relates to economies and societies in other parts of the world. In the Köppen-Geiger KG climate classification, we can start with the climates near the equator. And these are shown in pink and in red. These are the tropical climates. Areas near the equator are warm throughout the year. These are the regions that don't have a winter with freezing temperatures. They don't have snowfall or ice on the ground at any part of the year. And these equatorial, or places near the equator, are very distinctive in livelihoods, in lifestyles, in economic patterns, because these are places that are warm throughout the year. One very distinctive part of the tropical zone, which has the letter A in the KG climate classification is the part closest to the equator, which in the Americas, in Africa, and in Asia is the rainforest region. The equator is the warmest part of the year. The direct sunshine, the insolation or solar radiation is more intense per square meter on the equator than in any other place in the world. The air heats along the equator, and warm air rises, carrying moisture into the upper atmosphere, and the moisture condenses as the air rises and cools, and there is a lot of rain, therefore, at the equator. And that constant rainfall throughout the year produces the great rainforests of the Amazon and of the Congo Basin and of the Indonesian archipelago. And you can see in the bright red regions of the world this equatorial rainforest part of the world. The green parts of the world map are the places, unlike the tropical zones, that have winters and summers. These are normally called the temperate climate zones of the world. I live in one in the eastern coast of the United States. One can see the green zones in the west of the United States, California, in the Midwest and east of the United States. One can see green zones in South America, around southern Brazil and Argentina. One can see the green of Western Europe and North Africa, in Morocco, in the northern part of Africa. One can see a great green zone in East Asia, in the Great Plains of China, facing the South China Sea, facing the Pacific Ocean. And one can see the green on the eastern coast of Australia, in the southern hemisphere, in the cities of Melbourne and Sydney. It is these temperate zones that are characterized by warm summers and freezing winters. They are generally considered to have 4 seasons, and depending on location on the planet, they could be rainy throughout the year, as happens to be the case in New York, or on the west coast of the United States, and indeed the western parts of Eurasia as well, places that are wet in the winter, but dry and very sunny in the summer. And those are called Mediterranean climate zones, so a subcategory of the temperate zones. And those places have one very particular feature that we know. In places like Greece or Italy or California or Western Australia or Chile in the southern hemisphere, that are temperate climates, that are wet in the winters and very sunny and dry in the summers, those are great places to grow wine. So those are the wine growing climate zones in the world. If we move from the temperate zones northward, poleward, in the northern hemisphere, or southward from the temperate zones in the southern hemisphere, we get to colder climates. But especially in the northern hemisphere, there are large areas of dark blue and light blue, which are cold climates. And in the most poleward, that is the most northern latitudes towards the North Pole, these areas are cold essentially the whole year. They have permafrost, they have ice on the ground in these boreal regions all year round. Not great places for farming, and not places that can therefore support large, dense populations. Year-round cold climates. And so while the tropics at the equator are year-round warm areas, the areas near the poles are year-round cold areas, especially in the northern hemisphere. A very, very important climate zone that one sees on the map are the areas that are in yellow or beige. These are the dry parts of the world. These are the arid zones. In the KG climate classification, these are the B categories. And depending on exactly where they are located, they're either dry most of the year or essentially dry the entire year, in which case they are the desert regions. The places not quite in the desert, but where there is some rainfall during the year for 2 or 3 months, typically produce grasses during those rainy seasons, grasses that turn out to be very good for foraging and feed for livestock and notably for horses. And those regions are not desert, but are grassland regions, also called the steppe regions of the world. And one can see a vast belt of steppe region in the Eurasian landmass, the great landmass that connects Asia and Europe together. There is a large band of yellow and beige area in Central Asia and north of the Caspian and Black Seas that are large grassland regions. And these were, in history, the great horse breeding regions of the world that gave rise to the third age of globalization, the equestrian age. The message of climate is that, of course, climate differs across the world by virtue of physical geography and earth processes. Some places are hot throughout the year, others cold throughout the year. Some have 4 seasons. Some are dry, some are wet throughout the year. And all of these features fundamentally shape society and fundamentally shape economic life. In places with plentiful rainfall that is seasonal, in temperate zones, conditions are very good for growing staple crops like maize or wheat or rice. In places that are wet throughout the year in the rainforests, conditions are ideal for growing cacao to make chocolate or vanilla or other tropical agricultural products, including palm oil and other major tropical fruits that thrive in the wet, warm conditions. In places that are grasslands, the conditions favor pastoralism, raising goats and sheep, and horse breeding, giving rise to the great horse varieties of the world and the great horse-based empires of the world, such as the Mongol conquerors who conquered much of the world in the medieval period that we will study during the classical age. So climate shapes society, climate shapes patterns of agriculture, climate shapes relations across the world. Notably, the band of temperate climates in the northern hemisphere is a large interconnected band of several thousand kilometers stretching from the west of Eurasia, the very west being Portugal and Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, and stretching thousands and thousands of kilometers across the Mediterranean basin, the Middle East, northern India, Central Asia, and into East Asia, today's China, Japan, and Korea. And that belt, that temperate zone, roughly from around 15 degrees north latitude to around 30 to 35 degrees north latitude is where a lot of the Earth's population has lived, and a lot of the great political structures of the world, the great empires of the past and present, have developed. Historians have actually called that band of largely temperate zone Eurasian regions stretching the 10,000 plus kilometers from Europe to China as the lucky latitudes, because that region has been distinctively, over the long haul of history, the most prosperous and most technologically dynamic part of the world in the long stretch of history. In fact, we can see that that lucky latitude band was already thousands of years ago, 3,000 years ago, the home to the first urban settlements in the world. The first cities in the world were predominantly in the so-called lucky latitudes. Why? Because it was in these regions that agriculture was so productive that a proportion of the population could grow the food so productively that it could feed a significant part of the population that lived in non-agricultural settlements, specifically in urban areas. These are the regions of food surplus that could support non-agricultural urban activities. And so these lucky latitudes, we'll see, are very distinctive in history. And one of the evidences of that is that it is along the lucky latitudes of Eurasia, again, stretching from the Iberian Peninsula, today's Portugal and Spain, in the west of Eurasia, all across to the eastern border of China with the Pacific Ocean, that we see the great classical empires of the past. In the West, as of 100 AD, we see the Roman Empire. In the middle of Eurasia, we have the Parthian Empire, the Persian Empire. And moving all the way to the east, we have the great Han Empire of China. Now, what is distinctive about this zone is that there is a 10,000 kilometer stretch, not only of temperate climate, but of an east-west axis on which technologies, know-how, food production, and goods and services can trade. So the lucky latitudes were not only lucky in their capacity to produce food and food surpluses that gave an early leg up to urbanization, but also because of the contiguous 10,000 kilometer stretch of these lucky latitudes, this was the region of tremendous interchange, tremendous long-distance trade, tremendous flow of know-how and technologies, so that what was learned in one part of the lucky latitudes would spread or diffuse, as we say, to other parts of the lucky latitudes in history. And that gave them an added advantage because they were the recipients of knowledge and technological breakthroughs emerging often thousands of kilometers away, but spreading over the course of centuries to reach them as well, and thereby enabling technological advances that raised living standards and military might, allowing for the development and the growth of large empires. Now, just above the lucky latitudes was the dryland regions, the B zone of climate in the KG classification. The grassland regions that I have noted are also known as the steppe regions of Eurasia. And these steppe regions are notable for their grasslands, for the pastoral life that the grasslands support, because rain is not sufficient for large annual crop yields, but it is sufficient to produce the grasses on which the goats and the sheep, and especially the horses, can feed. And it is those horses and their ability to move fast which made a very special feature of the steppe region. Not only did the steppe region provide the horses for the equestrian age and the classical empires, but the steppe region was effectively the highway system of Eurasia throughout history, because this grassland with its horse populations was essentially an east-west connector along which trade and people could move. So the highways of the classical age, and what we know from history today as the great Silk Roads connecting the Roman Empire and the Han Empire, were effectively the steppe regions of Eurasia. We see, therefore, that climate really shapes the world and shapes the world economy. And as climate is changing, that is going to reshape the world and reshape humanity. We see, therefore, that climate shapes the world and shapes the economy. And as climate is changing, it's going to reshape the world economy and reshape how we live, and not necessarily in such easy ways. We're going to study human-induced climate change and why it is a danger and how it can be brought under control. But to understand that, we must understand the deep role of climate in shaping the ages of globalization.